Welcome to another episode of Outer Sounds. I'm here today with John McCowen, and we'll be chatting about his new album, Models of Duration, co-released by Astral Spirits and Dinzu Artifacts. It's the November selection for Outer Sounds, and it's great to have John here with us today. How are you doing?
Good,
Good.
good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so where are you? Where are we chatting you from?
I'm in Reykjavik, Iceland.
Okay, and that's where you live.
Yeah,
Nice,
lived
nice.
for about 2 years.
Nice. Yeah, so before we get into the record, you know, I would, to be honest, I don't know a whole lot about your, musical career or what you've been up to. I've seen your name pop up in a couple different situations, but if you wanted to just tell us about your kind of musical background and history and how you got started playing and all that kind of stuff, would love to hear about that.
Yeah, well, starting from like the earliest stuff, I started out as a drummer,
Okay.
like a punk drummer. Um, Moved from drums to vocals in punk bands. And then from punk bands, I was getting into jazz pretty heavily. While still, luckily, I was, in a punk band where we were not like in one of those scenes that's kind of militantly like this is what you can listen to.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
I've always found it funny that like in American hardcore music, for instance, like the two bands outside of hardcore that are okay to listen to were like the Smiths and Joy Division.
Yeah.
But we were into like Black Flag and Bad Brains and stuff like that, so that led to like late Black Flag led to like Ornette Coleman, which led to like John Coltrane and stuff
Right.
like that. And eventually I heard Albert Eiler and didn't see much of a difference between what he was doing with the saxophone and what I was doing with my voice.
Yeah.
So I switched to saxophone, and then the punk thing kind of dissipated, and I was in a number of bands, was in LA for a little bit in a band and touring, and then from there got into playing the bass clarinet, and then after all that decided to go to music school. And
Okay.
I went for uh composition, but eventually led to mainly like clarinet performance and composition. So,
Okay.
that kind of through line still maintains this day of being like a composer performer.
Yeah, yeah. What school did you go to, or who you
I
were
went,
studying with?
I went to Southern Illinois University,
Okay.
Carbondale,
Yep.
and I was studying with Eric P. Mandat, who, that was the school that was like 20 minutes from where I grew up.
Okay. So
And
you're from Illinois or close by?
yes,
Yeah,
southern
me
tip
too.
of Illinois. Oh, really?
Yeah, I grew up outside of Chicago in Crystal Lake, Illinois, which is like, northwest suburbs.
Yeah,
I went to
yeah, yeah.
school in Chicago and stuff too. So,
Yeah, my mom's twin sister lived in Crystal Lake for a long time.
hey, there we
Mm.
go.
But yeah, so I grew up outside Carbondale,
Okay.
like far Metro East St. Louis.
Yeah, right.
And yeah, so I found out through a friend who was giving me saxophone lessons about Eric Mandat, who, because I thought I wanted to go to like a New England conservatory or something like that. And then
That's
I
where I
found
went.
out that found out that Eric Mandat came up with like the quarter tone fingering charts for the clarinet and was one of the early innovators of multiphonics,
Yeah.
stuff like that. So we really clicked, and it was honestly like being kind of like a musical Luddite when it comes to like notation, sight reading, stuff like that. It was really the absolute perfect situation for me to be in.
Right. And so when you were in school, that's when you transitioned more towards playing clarinets,
I
or
yeah,
were you still
I was
playing
playing
saxophone, wind instruments?
when before that, like,
Hmm.
um when I was playing saxophone and listening to so much music all the time,
Yeah.
I would like get a Yusef Lateef record and hear him playing oboe
Right.
and you know, ocarina and all this
Mhm.
stuff, and then Rasan Roland Kirk, Art Ensemble of Chicago, all these
Yeah.
musicians who were like doubling, tripling, quadrupling, really opened up things. So like the band I was in LA, I was also playing flute.
Okay.
Um, and then, you know, heard Eric Dolphy, which led me to bass clarinet. And then Rasan Roland Kirk, I rented like a B flat clarinet from a band store. And I remember thinking, this is the hardest instrument I've ever encountered. Why would anybody play these?
Yeah.
And then, of course, like, you know, as the big cosmic joke, of course, this ends up being the instrument that I end up playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, well, obviously, Dolphy and probably Braxton, led a lot of people to bass clarinets or these like super bass, contrabass, instruments, just to see just, what was possible with some new sounds, in an improvised context. So then it seems like, maybe some of your first solo releases started coming out like around 2015-ish or something like that. Um, Tell me about how you were approaching, I don't know how long this was after you were in school or whatever, but how you started approaching your own, solo music and solo performances and how those like some of those first releases came about.
So the first solo record I did, I started working on in 2012 or 2013 while I was still at
Okay.
SIU.
Okay.
And like I had this situation where um there was a concert hall on campus that nobody ever used. And
Hmm.
so I kind of claimed that as my practice space. And
Nice.
yeah, they would lock the doors to the concert hall. So during the day, I would go into the concert hall and unlock the bathroom window so I know that I could open that
Sneak
up and
in.
get in there.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
I would practice in this like great, you know, reverberant concert hall every night. So that really kind of made writing this solo music much more inviting.
Hmm.
And so somehow, I don't know, just through trial and error, I would play. I loved the way multiphonic sounded. And then, so I just kept playing them and kept playing them. And at the time, uh, I had this practice where I tried using that as part of a meditation practice where I
Hmm.
would really like focus on the multiple layers of a multiphonic. And I think that's kind of what led me to like the language, like the personal language that I've developed. And yeah, just having, and also, you know, coming from like ambient and drone music and stuff like that. You know, I played a lot with friends who were guitar players who had pedals. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to access that kind of sound world. And so I
Right.
figured out through like multiphonic, like precise control of multiphonics with circular breathing could kind of get me there.
Right.
And then also at the same time, I was absorbing a lot of Roscoe Mitchell, Evan Parker. And so, like, listening to them, the main influence I took from them was that, okay, these things are possible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so they were listening to them kind of open me up to like, okay, so if I keep working on this, I can do something with this. And
Right.
so the first solo record I did was um took me a long time. I was recording every night. Didn't really know what I was doing. It was like a Zoom and an X like XLR to like SM57.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the good thing about that was I was performing a lot. Like Carbondale had a really thriving DIY scene that was really
Right.
open-minded, so I could try this stuff out in performance situations. And from that, it's just like I'm a avid practicer, like every
Right.
day.
Yeah.
And so also that kind of allowed me to every day to check in where I was at with like solo stuff. So it allowed me to have this ever evolving process. So besides that, like you know, with the solo records, there's contrabass clarinet solo records and there's B flat clarinet solo
Okay.
records. and both,
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
yeah, like, you know, they both kind of dictate a little bit what that language is. The
Yeah,
contrabass
right.
clarinet has a much more vast amount of harmonics, so it allows for a dronier, like, ebb and flow of harmonic material, and the B flat clarinet is like, a lot of high end, like, rapid lines interweaving with one another, kind of
Mhm.
more of a Roscoe Evan Parker kind of thing.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's cool. You have these instruments that, you've developed, some language on, and then they're able to kind of, I don't know, direct the course of the music a little bit too. That's cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So during, while you're developing your solo music, are you also playing in, you know, ensembles or collaborative situations? And how do you kind of see um, the difference between those worlds, or you don't, if you kind of see it as like a similar thing?
Uh, I mean, it can be similar depending on what the ensemble is.
Hmm.
Um, but it can be tricky to, like, be playing solo a lot and then end up in an ensemble situation and notice that my playing is made up of stuff that I do when I play solo. And I
Right. Yeah.
find that can be very troublesome for me. And it really, puts me in a limited situation.
Yeah.
So ensemble playing can actually be very refreshing for me because it allows me to have a more exploratory way of playing.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Try out some things that you're not always working on or trying to do or whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's how I see, whenever I do collaborations, it allows me to kind of get into some territory that I wouldn't necessarily get into myself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it sounds like you had a good teacher to get you started on, extended techniques and multiphonics and circular breathing. It sounded like that was a very kind of important um, person to like set the foundation for you. Um, can you tell us a little bit more about the maybe you've developed more techniques or multiphonics or just different ways of making the music you do. You can be as technical as you want or whatever, but I'm just curious because I think when people hear, the good thing is, like, when people hear the music, they don't always know how it's made. They just might, oh, I like the way this sounds. But then if you actually, I understand how, this music is made and how challenging it is and how it's, you have to be, you have to practice a lot to have the control to do this. But I'm wondering if you just want to like speak on that a little bit. And I know probably for you, probably the end result of it is more important than the technique and all the other stuff. But
Yeah, I mean, um, it's it's kind of, everything is equally important
yeah.
because, before I get there, I can hear the end result before I can actually play it. So to get to that end goal, I have no choice but to be very, very diligent about practicing and
Mhm.
things like that. So, um, well, like, I've actually been, um, making, like, diagrams to try and explain how this works. Like, for instance, the new record, Models of Duration, and some other new stuff I'm working on, I've kind of seen this, and, like, I have solo shows coming up and stuff, so I have to be running the stuff every day to check in where
Mhm.
I'm at with it. And so I've kind of been able to figure out the technique of it all, and
Okay. Yeah.
in a much more simpler way. And that is that, yeah, to get technical about it, um, with clarinet playing, two of the most important things about clarinet playing are voicing and airspeed.
Okay.
Voicing meaning which vowel shape you're using in your oral cavity to
Hmm.
produce a certain sound, and airspeed dictates like a very resonant sound and a flexibility to go between registers easily and fluidly.
Yeah.
Uh, and so with this kind of multiphonic approach of playing, it involves multiple voicings and multiple airspeeds, um, which can be hard to explain because it's like, of course, you can't really have multiple airspeeds happening,
Yeah.
but you can have faster air in the top of your oral cavity and slower air in the bottom of your oral cavity, depending on how your tongue is shaped.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, like, for instance, on models of duration and stuff like that, there's a lot of material where there's a low drone and high harmonic material that's fluctuating.
Yeah.
And what that requires is, and a lot of the pieces have a similar form where the foundational drone is, created and made steady, and then the higher material happens. And
Yeah.
so it kind of has to happen that way because I need to create that foundation, and then I can begin to manipulate voicing and airspeed.
I
Like
see. Yeah.
the lower drones have a more ah oh kind of vowel shape, and
Hmm.
then I have to, while maintaining the oh, I'm raising my tongue and getting an e sound coming over the top of the tongue while the o sound is still happening kind of to the sides and below the tongue, which is raised.
Yeah, that's super interesting and fascinating. That's your, just all the subtleties of the things you can do with your mouth and the shape of your mouth and the airflow and everything.
Yeah, I think a good way to explain it is, I'm not sure if they're on YouTube anymore, but there were like X-ray videos of Tuvan throat singers.
Yeah, I
And
think I've seen those before. Yeah.
yeah, and so the I don't, it's so technique wise, I think it's like a similar
Yeah.
thing without all the the manipulation of the larynx and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, I definitely want to talk about models of duration, obviously. It's a great record. I really like it. And the couple things that I really like about it, number one is um, I'm not sure what the right word is, kind of restraint or minimalism. All the pieces are very static, compositions, but within that, there's some very cool and subtle, like micro details going on. And I like the way the record is kind of presented. It's like you have the two, I think it's called duration one and duration two, that kind of like bookend the record. And then in the middle, you have two pieces that are a little more like noisier or textural or something like that. But there's still these kind of, you know, drone static kind of pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, how did you so how did you approach this record, or how do you approach any record of like putting an album together and recording the pieces and just kind of the overall like arch of the music, or how you want to present it?
Well, there's like multiple stages to writing these pieces, and they actually take a very long time, and it's taken a lot of time for me to realize this because so there's like the first period, which is the compositional and practice period,
Yeah.
where I'm trying things out, I'm assembling forms, um, like some of these pieces like duration, um, where I have to, it's pretty much one multiphonic.
Yeah.
But so that's kind of like what I'm dealing with is like, what is the compositional possibilities within like one multiphonic of
Right.
multiple sounds.
So you're
And
setting a limitation and then trying to like explore and work within that
well, I'm
for this piece in particular.
the clarinet kind of sets
Right.
the instrumentation.
Right,
And
right, yeah.
so then I'm exploring what the possibilities are and what the combinatorial possibilities of that are
Mhm.
by if I go ah e, I can bring out higher harmonics, but if I can find the spot, the meeting point of those, I can actually freeze things and have them happening simultaneously. and
Right.
when and when I reach that point, you get nice like difference patterns,
Yeah,
like beating tones that happen when they're kind of too close.
right. I noticed
um,
that.
yeah, and so that is like one of my favorite things. And
It's
so
almost that between space, right? Right, where you said there are two things, or it's almost going one way, almost going the other way. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and so that's kind of like the practice period. And then I'll record demos, I'll run it. When I'm in a process like this, I have to do it every day because I
Yeah.
can't afford to take a few days off and then lose all this progress I've made, because the clarinet is very unforgiving that way.
Right. And
um
you're probably developing, muscle memory, like you said, or just you have to
yeah,
be very precise about these things, right? Because I think what people don't understand is if you're playing multiphonics or something, any slight movement in one direction can like throw the sound out of whack, right? Or if you're just not
yeah,
doing it the same way every time.
yeah, I mean, it's like, I think, I don't know if the number is correct, I vaguely remember, like Kobe Bryant would shoot like 200 shots before a game.
Yeah,
Like he
totally.
would hit 200. And so yeah, establishing this muscle memory and then recording demos, listening back, deciding whether I like the form, whether it should be shorter, whether it should be longer, whether circular breathing is necessary or not, because I don't like to circular breathe for the purpose of showing that I can do that.
Right.
That's not musically important.
Yeah.
And that is kind of the spot where what like music can transform into entertainment. And
Yeah,
like,
for
I
sure.
don't know if that's the right word, but it's like, I'm a composer, I'm composing music, I'm not like doing like a show.
Yeah.
um but then once I determine the form, I used to make this mistake by, I would determine the form and I would be like, all right, this is done. And then I would actually record. But as time has passed, I figured out that that's just the first stage. The next stage is to then perform it in front of audiences, because that's where the big structural changes happen,
Yeah.
um, in performing in front of an audience.
Right.
And then, the length, all this stuff, because you can feel um, when an audience is checking out on you.
Yeah, for sure.
You know,
Especially this uh especially drone music, or long form music. I deal with this with my music, is that there's actually audience goes through like waves of expectations, and it's really interesting to um follow that, or just see how that happens with listeners.
uh-huh. Yeah, and so like performing it in front of an audience will kind of give me a final form.
Yeah.
And so the models of duration material, I think I started composing in 2018, like
Okay.
2017 or 2018. I was starting to hear the beginnings of like a new suite of material,
Yeah.
which just from like messing around in my studio and finding things that I liked and being like, okay, I'll just like check in on this every day and see where it goes.
Yeah.
And Models of Duration was finally recorded in 2020. So I was running the stuff a lot for 2 years.
Yeah.
And and then it took another 2 years for the record to come out. So I've been sitting with this material for nearly 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now it's like, a whole new batch of material.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really I like hearing about your process from, kind of practice all the way to recording stage and then putting it into a record. How did you link up with Astral Spirits and Dinzu?
Um, like Astral Spirits put out, I think my third solo record, 4 chairs in 3 dimensions.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
And so I had a connection with Nathan Cross from there.
Yeah.
And Joe McKay at Dinzu Artifacts had contacted me. He had started a label and just kind of contacted me and was like, I like your music. I'd like to work with you. And then I came to him and said, I want to do an LP for this. And so I think with the, having an LP record, he linked up with Nate at Astral Spirits.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that. Do you see, so this record, did you kind of compose it for the LP format, that medium? And what kind of limitations do you see with that? Like, obviously putting out a CD, you can have, longer continuous pieces, but, I know that since you're working with durational music, sometimes maybe you want to go for longer than an hour or whatever it is, and the LP doesn't quite afford that, obviously.
Yeah, I didn't really think about length with LP because actually there was another track, like another 13-minute track that was recorded in this session that didn't make it to the record.
Right, because it probably would have been too much material to fit onto a record.
Yeah, and after we recorded it, I just realized that it needed a lot more work.
Yeah.
And then also, the LP is like edited down for it to fit on a single LP.
Right.
But the main reason I wanted to do it on LP was because I realized this wasn't it's not an easy listen. It's
not. It's challenging, but it's rewarding if you sink into it, and then you can hear all these micro details that are happening.
Yeah, it demands patience and attention from the listener to get to this, like to get inside the music. Because if you listen to it at a surface level, there's nothing there for you.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do an LP because just from my own listening practices, if I listen to something on my computer, I'm much quicker to like stop it to go do something else.
Right.
But I've noticed that if I take the time to take a record out of a sleeve, put it on the turntable, put the needle on it, I'm going to listen to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so I thought that might help people actually get into the music easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I feel like at least people, I run a record store here in Vermont, so it's like at least I know that people who are spending money to buy an album or vinyl, and it's like it's because of the experience of it, and the actual, like, they like to do what you described, take it out, put it on the record player, sit on your couch, listen. You have to have, well, most people, you have to have like a somewhat decent, stereo and speakers and stuff like that, so it kind of works. One little aside note, I listened to the LP a few times. I've listened to it here a few times at home, but the other day I decided to listen to this record in the car, and it was wild, man. Like, especially during the first piece and the last piece, since there's so much low frequency tone on it, sometimes when some of the beating patterns were happening, it was like, that thing that happens where the bass will start pushing the air and it almost sounds like helicopter, because it's like there's these like fluttering air sounds, like probably because of the wind, going by, or just something to do with like the enclosed space. It was incredible. It added this whole other like dimension of air to the record, which I wasn't expecting. It was pretty cool.
And that was an interesting thing with recording that piece, is like it's a very like rare multiphonic that happens where, and it took me years to figure out how to control it, where I discovered that there's this wub 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 wub, and it's just happening for some reason inside the contrabass clarinet, and then I can add the harmonics on top of it.
Right.
And but because there is this beating pattern happening within the cylinder of the clarinet tube, other air pushing through there, like when you get the that's just like multiple air streams interacting within the cylinder.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's so yeah, I can't, like, listening to it in a car, I would imagine, yeah, like your door panels rattling. And
Yeah, exactly. I had like the back panel because I think the subwoofer in my car is like in the back in the
yeah.
trunk or whatever. But what are some of the I guess I have a couple more questions about the record or just process, but um what are some of the challenges of like recording the instrument properly so that everything you're trying to make speak is audible? And is it possible after you've recorded a piece, like if you're using, whatever, 5 6 microphones, that you can do some mixing to like highlight certain things? And then the second part of that is how important is the space or whatever room you're recording in, because I know you mentioned that was a big part of your discovery, was having access to like a concert hall, which I'm sure like the acoustics were really important to you, just to practice and just have a different, color to the sound that way too.
Mm-hmm. With this record, because when I play, like, my face is right at the instrument.
Yeah.
As the clarinet, any clarinet, but this, especially the contrabass clarinet, a saxophone has the luxury of having a conical shape. So, if you put a mic on the bell, you're going to get most of the sound.
Yeah.
But this long cylindrical tube has openings all over it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the sound is coming out from all kind of different locations. So for
Right.
each piece, Randall had to like go with his ear while I'm playing and be like, all right, low end is here, harmonics are up here.
Right.
And then we put mics on those spots.
Okay.
So mixing is incredibly important.
Yeah.
And but because I wanted to have the listener able to have the experience that I get, we actually did it in an isolation booth.
So you kept it as dry as possible so that you could replicate that.
Yeah. And so it's just like an extremely honest document with kind of no added frills or anything like that. And just kind of, I found myself at like just wanting to be really honest about what it is. And like, yeah, I know this isn't the easiest listen, but I think this is an important document when it comes to what the contrabass clarinet can do.
Yeah.
And like, the way I think about this is, I run into people every now and then that are just like, that don't understand it and go like, well, why don't you just play electronics?
Right.
And it's like, I find that troublesome that we've given up on the acoustic instrument.
I know.
We can play 12 tones on them, and then we go, and then we figured out microtones, and then we figured out some like neat effects, and then people want to cut it off.
Right.
But we're done. We have computers now. And I want to say, no, there's like so much more possibilities within this instrument that, yeah, maybe they weren't designed for.
Right.
But they're like, I kind of have this thought that I hope that other people become this like passionate and obsessed with these acoustic instruments, to where I hope that maybe in 70 years there will be some saxophone player who can actually has figured out all the formants and the vowel shapes to where they can actually sound like the human voice through a saxophone.
Yeah.
That's like the way future.
Yeah, I mean, people are always going to be hopefully developing, new language and new stuff for their instruments. But I think that's one thing I mentioned about this record at the front is I think I said I like the restraint of it, and by that I meant and that you resisted the urge to add electronics, like electronic drone or whatever, any processing or things like that. And you also resisted like an urge to do overdubbing. I don't know if you utilize that in any of your other music, but this record in particular, like you said, it's almost like highly microscope focused on your instrument and what you're doing with it. And that's what we get to listen to. And I think that's super cool. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's like, I just want an honest document because, I don't do all this practicing to like
yeah.
add electronics to it.
Right.
Um, and I'm kind of finding things out as time goes on, but there was like a scene in Berlin in the early 2000s that was doing this kind of thing. There was a saxophone player named Gregor Holtz,
Mhm.
Axel Derner,
Yeah, I
um,
know Axel.
Rudy
Yeah.
Mahal, the bass clarinetist, and some other people that kind of like the lowercase, like solo lowercase thing that came out of
Yeah.
Berlin. There's like a number of like compilation CDRs that were put out, that I kind of found out about afterwards, and I was just like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, yeah, yeah. It's like, so
There's
it's,
yeah, there's people doing stuff. Yeah.
and they're very like honest, dry documents of this thing of like, yeah, I'm not practicing this much to like mess
Right.
with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Along those lines, I wanted to ask you, who are some of your favorite composers, musicians, records, maybe things
Oh,
that
wow.
maybe things that inspired this record or just recently. I'm sure there's always tons of stuff, but any
Yeah.
comes in mind.
I think like one of the things that has helped me come to this kind of process is not listening to too many clarinet players.
Yeah.
Um, like, you know, uh, I don't think clarinet players that listen to other clarinet players are going to do anything new or interesting.
Right.
Um, I mean, it has happened, and out of Charlie Parker, we got Eric Dolphy,
Right.
but um, you know, uh, so like it's mainly a lot of like electronic music, and also like oh man, it's so much.
I know it's
um
hard, right?
like a musician who I think is extremely important to what I developed is an electronic composer by the name of Maggie Payne.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um I studied with her at Mills College.
Okay.
uh, I think she's one of the most amazing composers, and her ears are so highly refined that she was an electronic musician, but when I was writing new solo pieces I would email them to her just
Mhm.
because her ears, it's like she has the ears of like a falcon or something,
Yeah.
something like that. So Maggie Payne was huge for me. Early Pauline Oliveros.
Yeah.
uh seeing, like, I saw the first Occam pieces of Eliane Radigue in 2014 performed
Yeah.
by
That
Kurt
was
Robinson.
something I was gonna mention was her more recent instrumental pieces definitely have a connection here with what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. It was the thing that I like about the Occam music in relation to my own practice is that, like, I was developing this stuff and then I heard the Occam
Yeah.
music.
Yeah.
And so you have this kind of like celebratory moment of like, I'm not alone.
Yeah. I love
And
when that happens because you think, oh, I'm like doing this thing and I'm developing this thing, and then you're like, oh yeah, right. There's always going to be at least one person or somebody else out there that's maybe thinking or doing something in a similar way too, and then it's
yeah,
like
and
yes.
like I saw a big Occam concert in New York at Pace Gallery a few years back.
Hmm.
And the amount of practicing I do and the amount of like physical pain I kind of have to not recognize as pain to like get to where I'm at. And what used to be pain isn't pain anymore. So
Right.
like
Right.
that's good for, but to see somebody like Charles Curtis,
Oh
like
yeah.
with the wrist and then or somebody like Robin Hayward, how he plays the tuba.
Yeah.
You know, that was so inspiring for me. And, you know, Nate Woolley, Carol Robinson, you know, all these people, to see that
Yeah.
they're willing to take the time to Julia Eckhart, yeah, all these musicians that Radigue has put around her is like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy.
No. Yeah. Yeah. Um, cool. Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, just wanted to ask just a couple more things. Do you plan on presenting this music live, or not? And if you do, does it change in a live context, or like you said, you like to run these pieces through the live context first before you actually even record them? So
Mm-hmm. Well, what, you know, these pieces have already been recorded, but
yeah.
they're always evolving.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, that's something I learned from Roscoe Mitchell, as somebody who is like, you know, taken Nonea from what 1974
Right.
and then brought it here through a bunch of different things. Is he always told me, he's like, if something is still evolving, don't stop it, don't stop playing it.
Right.
Follow, it was your idea, so follow it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as it's like informing you.
Yeah.
So actually, because the pieces are concrete, like documents on record, playing them live is one of the great joys I have, because just like when I'm playing and the circular breathing is fine, the read is good, I can access everything, like that zone where I have full sculpting capability of the sound.
Mm-hmm.
It's indescribable.
Right.
You know, I think I heard Nate Woolley call it like getting past the A B, like I can't remember, but it's kind of like this way of getting outside of your physical self.
Yeah.
You've done all the physical work, and you can almost sit outside yourself and listen to yourself play.
Yeah.
And you know, you could say it's a meditative state, but I don't know necessarily if it's a meditative state, because I think, you know, my brain is still going like, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh, but
Yeah.
you know,
Our brains are always trying to do that, you know, even when we're meditating, you know. So
yeah,
that's part of it, is like
let the
clearing the
voice
mind.
pass through.
Yeah. Just
And
oh yeah, that's just the oh fuck, just kind of, you know,
yeah.
just
Oh, hi, how you doing? Bye.
yeah, just
And,
coming through, just passing through. Yeah.
so yeah, performing live is one of the great joys of this music. And you know, I have some shows coming up starting next week. Cafe Auto in London, solo show at Roulette in Brooklyn, actually with my first clarinet teacher, Eric Mandat.
Oh, cool.
We will both be doing solos, and then a duo with Layla Bourdrais, the great cellist and composer, the next day. Yeah, a number of things. Solo show in Chicago at the Chicago Cultural Center on the 29th, and then on the 30th at Hanger Gallery in Bloomington, Illinois.
Nice.
Yeah.
Getting back to Illinois.
Well, it was nice. You know, they asked me, we see you in Chicago, would you come to Bloomington? I was like, yeah, of course.
Yeah, this is
where ISU is.
Yeah. Cool. So it sounds like a lot of live performances. What's next in terms of recording or records or anything you've got in the works?
Last week, actually a few days ago, we finished mixing it. I did a record for clarinet duos with Madison Greenstone that came out on Edition Bondelweiser a number of years ago. And I wrote another, like Madison was just in Reykjavik, and we recorded this about an hour's worth of contrabass clarinet duos that I composed.
Nice.
And this is very exciting for me, because you know, it's much different than the Models of Duration space, where like I've always liked records that from beginning to end are like a vibe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so this is very much my attempt at making a record where, you know, somebody doesn't need to like sit and pay close attention. Like
Hmm.
there's it's I don't know why, but just when I imagine people listening to this record, I imagine people like cleaning their houses or like making dinner or something
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
So it's much more of an
A different, yeah,
inviting,
different experience. Yeah.
a more inviting headspace. But you know, I don't know when that'll come out with, you know, how backed up record labels are these days. Hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah.
Um, I'm transitioning into a lot more. I want to, you know, the solo stuff will always continue, but I want to try. You know, I was going to do another solo record, and I kind of have decided to take that solo material and orchestrate it for an ensemble.
Yeah.
So hopefully that'll see me like I'm in the process of assembling like a working ensemble for this music.
Nice.
So yeah,
Yeah, I
it
was
will
going to ask
become.
about that if, yeah, if you wanted to work with larger groups or write for larger groups. But yeah, that sounds like an exciting, possibility or direction for sure.
Yeah, I just want to see if it's possible for the things that happen within the cylinder of the clarinet can also be created in an open space by multiple instruments, which
Yeah.
will be like a much harder situation.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
also, I'm interested in like challenging the conventions of what is considered drone music.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. There's a lot of stuff coming
Yeah.
up.
Well, that's great, John. I really appreciate you chatting with me today, and I'll be sending out your record to the Outer Sound subscribers in November. So get you get some more ears to check it out. So I think it's a good one for the series, and yeah, hopefully I'll get a chance to meet you or see you perform one of these times. That'd be great.
Yeah, I definitely. Next year. I want to later next year come back through the U.S. and you
Yeah,
know, Greg, I greatly appreciate you taking the time to
of
listen to
course.
the record,
Yeah.
and I appreciate the questions. And yeah, I am thankful for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks, man. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
All
All
right,
right. Bye bye.
bye.